Just a brief reminder to sign up for our free newsletter. I will put a link to that in the notes below. And please consider supporting the Morin Academy on Patreon. What I'm going to do for the next few weeks is deal with the Platonic dialogue called Gorgias. And it's all about the promises and perils of democracy. Now, because it's an ancient work, there are many translations from the Greek for this work, and you can find it as a paperback in a lot of places, not much money, but you can also find it readily available online. And something like this conversation probably happened. Now, it's kind of like a composite, probably, right, of conversations that Socrates had. His student Plato is writing it down after Socrates' death. And, we can see in it kind of the essence of Socrates' arguments with certain types of people. But we do know that Chaerephon, Polus, Gorgias, they all were real people. It's possible that Callicles was. We can't find a whole lot about Callicles outside of this dialogue, though. So he may also be a kind of composite character. And of course, we have Socrates, teacher of Plato. Chaerephon is a student of Socrates. Polus is a student of Gorgias. Gorgias is a diplomat and a teacher of rhetoric. And then we have Callicles, who I would call both a rhetorician and a philosopher. So Callicles is more like Socrates' match than anybody else in this dialogue. But the dialogue focuses on what this character Gorgias does, okay, which is to teach rhetoric. That's what they really zero in on. All right. He professes to be able to teach people to use public speaking to get whatever they want. And he's particularly aiming his teaching at wannabe politicians. I call Socrates a midwife of philosophy because he called himself that. He said that his job was to help people give birth to good ideas. All right. And that these ideas were more his children than his children were, in a way, was the message. And also he called himself a gadfly of democratic Athens, who was always kind of like, you know, how a horsefly bothers, the poor horse is trying to like throw it off all the time and it's stinging, right? This is how he conceived of his relationship with Athens. He stuck real close to Athens. He only left it for military service. At the same time, Athens was always kind of uncomfortable with him and throwing him off. And his stinging was his philosophy, which was basically very critical of Athenian politicians and Athenian democracy. So in Socrates, you get somebody who is he's kind of a radical within democratic Athens because he disagrees with the system. He criticizes people in power. He also has this kind of romantic attraction in a lot of ways, actually, as we'll see. But basically, people are attracted to him because he exudes this confidence and wisdom. Okay. Now he himself said, well, part of my wisdom is I don't actually claim to know anything, right? Because I know how complicated things are, and I know how tenuous knowledge of the truth. And so, he extolled this humility as well in his speech, but I think in his bearing, and you can see this in how he addresses others, he is very confident and seems wise and smart, and that attracted people. It attracted some of the same types of people who were attracted to Gorgias as a teacher of rhetoric. But the people who stayed with Socrates were people who wanted to try to move beyond that kind of concern of being a politician, of being somebody with power, to gaining more wisdom. So anyway, these are the characters in the dialogue. And a chief reason for a dialogue to write in a dialogue style is that you do get to see the positions of the other people. Now, it may not be that they all are treated terribly fairly by Plato, but at least you get to see what Socrates is arguing against. And I would say that there is a point or two in this dialogue, especially when it comes to Callicles talking to Socrates, where Callicles defeats Socrates in at least some of the points. All right, so what we will see in this dialogue are things like the motivations of politicians, what politicians say, and what politicians are actually motivated by. And Socrates is going to keep questioning and questioning until he gets to the very heart of what really motivates most democratic politicians. We're going to talk about the place of reason versus the place of rhetoric in leading a society. In a democracy, political rhetoric, speech making, communications with constituents, to use modern language, is at the very heart of it all, of the process. And in fact, that those communications, as you know, can be very irrational, but that doesn't stop them from being very effective. So what is the place of reason, if there is any, in a system like that? And that question gets us into the whole issue of whether democracy is the best form of government or not. Okay, so we'll get into that. Also, we will discuss religion's relationship to politics, because at the end of the dialogue, there's this incredible myth that Socrates tells that ties what he's argued concerning rhetoric up with sort of an eternal scheme of reward and punishment, a reminder that human beings may have life after death. And if they do, one has to ask the question, how should I live my life? Should it be that of the powerful democratic politician, or should it be the life of the philosopher or maybe the saint? Okay. Now, and that is the fourth point there. We will be talking, strangely enough, quite a bit about life's purpose. That question gets to the heart of, what should I do with my life? What should I be pursuing? And Socrates is going to try to argue against the notions that most people have, he thinks, about what they ought to be pursuing, what will make them happy. He says in more than one place, what you think makes you happy is going to make you miserable. You need to think more clearly about what life is for and where actual happiness comes from. We will be getting into this whole theme of these two major categories, idealism and realism in political thought. The idealist, of course, somebody like Plato, who says that first we come up with moral standards or standards of justice, and then we decide what government should be like and what politicians should do. Now, the realist, and that would be somebody like Gorgias, Polus, Gorgias, Callicles. He's up against three realists, in this dialogue. They would say, no, first of all, you have to figure out how people actually behave and what actually motivates them, not what should motivate them, but what actually does. And then wrap your political system and your leadership around that. That will tell you, how to rule. And those are two very different positions. And those two positions, idealism and realism, you will still see in modern political discourse. They're basic motivations, basic ways of looking at the world that come through in our own day, in the political speech that people use, in the very expressions of their political aspirations, and so on. And they have consequences. Both categories have strengths and weaknesses that, if you know them, they're like keys that can help you unlock arguments and proposals in politics and decide what you think about them. We will be getting to this problem of the addiction to power. I have a picture of Gary Hart there because he famously spoke in an interview, I think with PBS, about how he himself had become addicted to power and how he sort of empathized with Machiavelli, one of the chief philosophers of realism, in realizing that he had become so addicted to power that when he was forced to leave political office, because he had a scandal that by today's standards would be a mere like sniffle or hiccup but at the time, like, ruined his chances for continuing in politics. When he had to leave, he didn't know what to do with himself, because he had spent his adult life pursuing power in a democratic setting. And he said it was exhilarating, and it just, so like attractive that, literally it felt almost like dying to not be able to do it. So this is the kind of character that Gorgias is, probably, yes, Callicles definitely is, that Polus wants to be, is trying to be. And Socrates is going to have to address these guys and try to argue that no, until you can give up, until you can let go, be cured of this addiction to power, you can't really be living a good, healthy, happy life. So he's going to talk about the soul, believe it or not, the interior character of a person. And he's going to argue that there are healthy souls and there are sick souls, and sick souls are addicted to power, and they do injustice in order to gain money and power, and they become enslaved. And he will argue, the most miserable and kind of pathetic of all people, despite the fact that they can do things like get other people killed or, gain a lot of wealth. So as I hope you can see, there's an awful lot to the Gorgias, the dialogue Gorgias. Like I said, it's not long. I would actually encourage you to follow along as I go through this book. Next time, I'll probably get maybe like, I don't know, 1/5 the way through. I think I'll probably do about 5 videos on this book. Again, remember, subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out once a month, and you can do that by clicking on the link in the notes below, and consider supporting the Morin Academy on Patreon. So that was my new cat. It was provisionally named Paisley, but I didn't pick the name. But this little rascal actually shut down my Zoom recording and my entire Zoom call. So let's see if we can get through the rest of this. Even if you've never really tried reading one of these things or studying them, this might be actually a pretty good idea. In today's world, to do this kind of thing is to immediately be different from most people and to have access to a set of ideas that most people do not take the time to access, and they're mind-expanding ideas. So that's one reason, we all kind of want to be different. We want to have different experiences. Well, this is definitely a way that you can do that. It leads to a sort of self-awareness and contemplation of your own life. You will know more the more you study these classics, not just the ancient classics, but classics of philosophy, political philosophy, theology, science, classics of lots of fields. Many times when you go to university, if you go, you find that they don't spend a lot of time studying the older works that were foundational for current thought. But without doing that, you have no idea what the current thought, what the current studies are actually based on or disagreeing with. So by studying the classics, you know more. The classics give you categories of thought that are indispensable. So for instance, in the one that we're going to deal with next, Plato's Gorgias, you get to know what idealism and realism mean, okay? You get to know what rhetoric is, political rhetoric, democracy, why rhetoric is important to democracy. These are foundational, fundamental concepts and ideas that have stood the test of time. And as a result, you can think better about what's being said today, because you can immediately go, oh, that's political rhetoric. Oh, this is a weakness of it. This is a strength of it. Oh, this person is an idealist. Now I understand the strengths and weaknesses of that. I have some idea of how to sort through contemporary arguments. So believe it or not, these classics can give you an excellent way to begin to think in not a reactive way, but in a more reasoned way, which will help you to simplify and really understand, grasp at a deeper level what is happening even now. Many people are discouraged from reading these classics because they aren't supposed to be for them. They represent ideas that are fundamentally, inherently available to everybody, regardless of your gender, your ethnicity, your location on the globe, or any other difference. And when we say, oh, those aren't for you, or why would you want to read those? We're basically saying you don't need this whole resource. You don't qualify maybe for this resource. I would say take what you can get, from wherever you can get it, is the like motto for knowledge. Okay. And so I think we do a real disservice when we treat these things as either, oh, those are old and therefore, they've been superseded, or we say, well, because you're not from a certain category of people, you have no real reason to read these classics. You will find that much of where you are today has to do with some of these old ideas, for better and for worse, but only by understanding how these ideas actually shaped and affected people's lives all the way along. How will you have a fully realistic idea of your own situation right now? And that kind of leads to the last reason, which is you study classics because it's a way of fighting hubris, which just in what I'm referring to there is just the pride that we tend to have, a sort of arrogance that we tend to have that says that which is modern or contemporary is superior to anything else, right? But when you actually read these things, you realize, oh my gosh, they knew about some of the problems that we are grappling with right now. And so to just say that because it's newer, it's better, I mean, look around. That's obviously not true in all cases. So fight the tendency human beings have to be hubristic, to think that their time and their place are the best, and see what other people had to say from a very different place and time. So those are some reasons for studying the ancient classics.